so far managed to hold on to the cold since my daughter went back to preschool, but you never know. It's future every day. So, how many of you are new to this semester? Are you some new people? This is awesome! That is incredible! That is really fun. Even when I came in, I really felt the energy in here. It was really fun. So many to see so many people back, especially in this weather. I have a funny story. When I got in my car tonight, it was in the garage, it was really dark, and I, get nervous and I start backing out, and I look in my rearview mirror and I see a person, and I have a heart attack, and then I realized it's myself. I had walked around. Our garage is so cold, it's like a hoarder's den. I pushed the mirror in to get around it earlier and forgot I did that. So, whew, crazy evening driving in the dark. So, way to go making it here from work or from home, wherever you guys came from. That's awesome. So, I don't know about you guys. For those of you who were here last fall, it's been a long break since we were together. So, it's really fun to be back again. I know the Christmas holidays bring a lot of really wonderful times, also some stressful times. So I have a few pictures of my, wrong spot. Here we go. We have our Christmas photo fail moment, where we were trying to get my two kids, my sister and son, to take a picture down the stairs with Troy, and it just was not happening. We had a scrappy idea. I'll get my husband to Photoshop their heads later. And then we have our peaceful, relaxing post-Christmas lunch, where you can see our table is beautifully set with markers, Legos, trucks, and that's the tail of a dog. So, kind of the craziness of the Christmas season. And then the moments that just make you realize it's okay. You get through the days, you have to draw our loved ones close. I had a hard year last year, and so it was really fun to just think of what I have. So, I wanted to try to not take too long to recap what we learned last fall. So for those of you who are new, you can kind of see what we did in the fall with Matthew 1 through 12. And I'm going to be using this really fun poster. So I don't know if you guys are excited as me about this, but the Bible Project, if you've been around here for a while, you've heard this name again and again. They are two guys who were friends in Multnomah Bible College, who created this nonprofit with this idea of spreading the message of Scripture and the Gospel in a really new and fun way, using kind of visual animation and all kinds of tools. And most of it is free to use. I checked their copyright stuff, and it said as long as you're not profiting from it, you can print it, use it, whatever. You can actually buy really big posters of this, because I know this tiny font is really hard for me because I have horrible vision. But at least the 2 pages together, you can hopefully kind of read a little bit. So if you remember the I think it was the very first week last fall, we showed a video from the Bible Project that was the first half of Matthew. So we kind of got the intro and a few of the first sections, and they went through it so fast. And if you're like me afterwards, you're like, what just happened? That was so much information. So I was really excited when I found out we could print this for free and just kind of use it to go through. So I'm just going to use this as a visual aid as I talk about what we learned in the fall. Then we'll watch the second half of Matthew Bible Project video. So it has a little recap of the other video, but then mostly it's new information. So if you want to kind of follow along with this poster, or I have a lot of pictures up here, and I really encourage you to check it out on your own, on your phone or on your laptop, computer, BibleProject.com. This is the link where I got this poster if you want to print it for yourself, although you have it now. And they have so many books of the Bible they've done, and they're doing new ones all the time. They have different theme videos, they have videos on word studies throughout Scripture, tons of amazing information. It's a really fun way to watch it. So check that out. Okay, so let's go through the introduction. Matthew, probably one of the books of the Bible I've read the most, if you're like me. Every time you kind of, I'll read through the New Testament, and start with Matthew again. But it's really fun that every time I've read this, every week I come this past fall, I learned something new. One of the things that I got from the first is that it's not 100% certain that Matthew wrote this book, but most scholars and tradition have decided it was Matthew, one of the 12 disciples, who was tax collector. And that after about 30 or 40 years of oral tradition, kind of stories being passed on by the disciples, by the eyewitnesses of Jesus' life, Matthew took these different stories and compiled them in kind of a really beautiful way, with organizing the stories that lead you to conclusions about who Jesus is. So that's why sometimes when you read Mark or Luke or John versus Matthew, some of the order is different, and it seems like, oh, did they get the chronological order wrong or Jesus' life? But sometimes it's arranged for a purpose, for a theme. And so we're going to look at that a little bit. One of the things we notice again and again about Matthew, the author, is that he's writing to the Jewish audience. He brings in so much information from the Old Testament, the law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. He talks about the heroes of the Jewish faith and kind of relates them to Jesus. So in the very beginning of Matthew, you have the genealogy of the line that Jesus was born into. And you notice a couple of really important things. And this is, I'm kind of going off the 1, 2, 3 right under the title of your poster. So the first one is that he's the son of Abraham, a blessing to all nations. You remember in the Old Testament, God made a covenant with Abraham. He promised him that all people would be blessed through you. And it's kind of foreshadowing Jesus. So the fact that Jesus traces the lineage back to Abraham kind of proves that. Then there's that he's in the line of David, the line of kings of Israel. So he is the kingly line. He has the right authority to rule, not just politically, but also spiritually. So those are a couple things Matthew kind of ties in there in the genealogy. That's why it's important. Then you have this other parallel that you'll see in the birth story. Matthew brings in all these scriptures from the Old Testament to kind of show, oh, are you reading about this in the birth story? See how Jesus did this? See how Jesus went in Bethlehem? See this? All of it is coming back to Old Testament prophecies that they know. And in the really teeny tiny font, under the camels, under the camels right there, under the word Bethlehem and under the word birth, I thought it'd be fun to look at what those verses actually were. So the first one, I was not as familiar with. So I would encourage you to read Isaiah 60 when you get a chance. And I kind of pulled out some of the verses that really popped out to me in that chapter that I felt like I saw in the story of this birth. The first was, it said, nations will come to your light and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Thinking about the different people coming and following the stars. How that light. They're bearing gold and incense, proclaiming praise to the Lord, but it's sacrificing. Then Micah 5:2 is probably more familiar to you. But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old. So kind of he is going to be one of them. There's some really cool things that we see right in the beginning of Matthew. He's trying to nudge his Jewish audience to see who he is. Another thing, and then probably the most famous of all, Isaiah 7:14. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. So again, Jesus is all today. Another thing we see is one of the Jewish patriarchs, Moses, one of the heroes of their faith. And there's some interesting parallels we'll see in Matthew, where Matthew kind of holds up Jesus and Moses, which could be kind of offensive to the Jewish people if they didn't believe Jesus was who he said he was. I found one website that talked about some parallels between Jesus and Moses, and I'll read these really quickly because I thought this was so interesting. Both Jesus and Moses, as babies had an evil king or ruler try to kill them. They both were hidden and saved by the women in their family, and Jesus, Joseph also. They both grew up in Egypt. They were both adopted. Jesus was adopted by Joseph. Moses was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. There's a long period of silence from their childhood to adulthood. We're not really sure about those kind of formative years. They both have a secret identity. Moses is secretly exclusively raised the Egyptians. Jesus, secretly divine, he raised humans. They both went from a high to a low station. They both saved a woman at a well. John 4. They were both rejected by their own people quite often. They both had important moments on a mountain, both receiving or giving the law. Spent 40 days fasting. They both spent time in the wilderness. They both performed signs and miracles. They both delivered people from slavery, whether physical slavery or slavery to sin. And then, if you'll see, and this chart is over on the far left of your poster. There's a little Jesus and Moses chart. And at the bottom, we see Jesus is bringing a new covenant. He is even greater than Moses. He's doing what Moses was not able to do. Because even when Moses gave the law and all these wonderful, beautiful covenants with God, still didn't work. We'll still sin again and still fail. Jesus comes with a greater role, greater illness. And that's just really, really hopeful. So another thing is that you'll see these 5 little rectangles on the poster, kind of labeled chapters 4 through 7, 8 through 10, 11 through 13, 14 through 20, 25. Some scholars have said this kind of 5-fold arrangement where Matthew, the author, kind of takes different stories and important discourses or sermons, you'd say, and put them into 5 groups. Maybe perhaps modeling the 5 books of the Torah that Moses made. So that's kind of an interesting theory that you can look into further. So I'll just talk about the first 3 sections, and then we'll let the video do the last 2 of them. So the first section, if you'll remember, chapters 4 through 7, Matthew sets the stage for the early ministry of Jesus in his hometown of Galilee. We see Jesus being tempted. We see him calling the disciples. We see his early ministry in Galilee. And then, the big discourse in this first section is the Sermon on the Mount, which, if you remember from doing the homework, those of you who are here, that was a huge part of our homework. So much concern, so much information in that section. And what it was doing was really announcing this new kingdom that the Messiah was bringing. And not the kingdom that many of them thought or hoped for. Many of them were hoping for kind of a political kingdom. Like, let's get the Romans out and put our own people on the throne and we'll be in control. Jesus had a different picture. It wasn't this kingdom built, it was a kingdom of people's hearts. And so the Sermon on the Mount is really showing what does that kingdom look like? How do we live in this kingdom? And a lot of it was pretty radical for the way that culture, really our culture today, lives. The next section, 8 through 10, Matthew uses this to show the kingdom coming and miracles and healings. And there's a really interesting structure that when I watched this last fall, this video, I wanted to dive into a little more. And if you see, there's the 9 little circles in this section. It's kind of hard to read, real tiny. But there's this ascending order that Matthew gives these stories, where the first 3 healings are just physical healings. I mean, I couldn't think just, like, oh, just healed someone from leprosy. But still, then the next one, so he heals a leper, an outcast from society. He heals a centurion servant, a political enemy, and then he heals one of their own, one of the disciples' mothers, his sick mother. Then you see the little follow me box. Jesus and the teacher of the law, very holy person, very good, someone you would expect to be your hero. Like, oh, it's this guy, he should jump in and do his kingdom. Jesus asks him to follow. He says, first, let me go bury my father. Meaning, like, let me go, I'm going to live my life. So you see a rejection of Jesus by the people that were through the law. Yeah. Then we have three more miracles. And the next cluster, and this is a cluster over nature, the spiritual realm. Not just physical bodies, but now something a little higher. There's the calming of the seas, the demonized men, it's a very powerful story, and then the paralyzed man. If you remember, one of the Pharisees were furious with Jesus. Because what did he say to the paralyzed man? He said, your sins are forgiven. They were, who are you that you can forgive sins? Like, they were okay with him healing the man's legs so he walked. So, like, don't say his sins are forgiven. That's only for God. So Jesus is really making it obvious who he is. Then the next following story is actually the author of this book, Matthew, the tax collector. So here's a tax collector, a man who's a sellout for his own people, who's taking their money and supposedly giving it back to Rome, but he keeps a good portion for himself to get rich. So he is just despised. They can't stand him, especially the holy Jewish people. Because they're like, you are just horrible to me. And he's someone who thinks would be the villain. Jesus he follows. And then he has this incredible ministry. And eventually what we need is the study of this book. In the last cluster, Matthew makes a point of sharing how the crowds are starting to spread from Jesus. First kind of in this little hometown city, then kind of larger region, and then even farther. And he ends the very last healing where Jesus healed the demon-possessed mute man. Which when I read it back in college, it didn't seem like that. I mean, compared to some of the other miracles we've done, it's more important. But what we learned, I think, in the homework that we learned is something I thought but a lot of the Jewish people believe you can't be healed from the demon that heals. Say the name of the demon. And so they thought a man who was mute, like, sorry, you're done. There's no way. But Jesus healed him. It was so incredible that the people said, nothing like this has ever been seen. So, not in the time of Abraham, not in the time of David, not in the time of Moses. Jesus is greater than all of these kingdoms. This is something. And so with that, Jesus sends out his 12 disciples. And he warns them of the hardships they're going to face. He tells them that people will reject you, people will hate you, people will and here's what you do. Send them out. And then we have the last section I'm going to talk about today, which we only really got through part of it, 11 and 12 in the fall. And this is where you see the different responses. Some people say, this is the Messiah, this is the one we've been waiting for. Others are like, this is weird, I'm not sure about this. And then still others, like the Pharisees, hate it. This guy is blasphemous, he's demon-possessed, he's evil, he's completely wrong. It's a very polarized thing. Even John the Baptist questions him. He says, are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else? Even for John the Baptist, what Jesus was doing, who he was bringing, wasn't everything John the Baptist had come to him. It was even more than he understood. And then we have the Pharisees. So we have on one side all the tax collectors, prostitutes, and the people who are only half Jewish, or people who are looked down upon. These are the types of people who follow Jesus. Lord, on the other hand, the people you would expect, holy people, the law, they're rejected. Partly because Jesus is pointing out their hypocrisy, especially in overturning people. They're furious. And this is kind of this halfway point where Matthew is kind of explaining what's going on next. Tension is building between the law. Now, most of us know what's going to happen. But it really encourages us. Read it with fresh eyes. Look at the situation. their relationship to Jesus. And I think it'll give you such a richer picture. So, we'll take a minute, we'll watch this second part of the video, and then I'll just come up and say a couple of closing words before we go to comments, okay? So hopefully we'll learn.
The Gospel according to Matthew. In the first video, we saw how Matthew introduced Jesus as the Messiah from the line of David, and as a new authoritative teacher like Moses, and also as Emmanuel, which in Hebrew means God with us. After Jesus announced and taught about the arrival of God's kingdom, and after he brought the kingdom into day-to-day life among the people of Israel, we saw that Jesus was accepted by many, but rejected by others, especially Israel's religious leaders, the Pharisees. And so the big question is, how is this conflict between Jesus and Israel's leaders going to play itself out? The next large section, chapters 14 through 20, explore all the different expectations people have about the Messiah. So Jesus keeps healing sick people, and twice he even miraculously provides food for these huge crowds in the desert. One's made up of Jewish people, and the other is a non-Jewish crowd. And this sign, it's very similar to what Moses did for Israel in the wilderness. And so all these people are excited about Jesus. They think he's the great prophet and the Messiah, but not the religious leaders. Their view of the Messiah is built on passages like Psalm 2 or Daniel chapter 2 about a victorious Messiah who's going to deliver Israel and defeat the pagan oppressors. And from their point of view, Jesus, he's a false teacher. He's making blasphemous claims about himself. And so there are stories here about them increasing their opposition, hatching a plan to kill him. And so in response, Jesus, he withdraws, and he begins teaching his closest disciples what it means for him to be Israel's Messiah, because it is not what anybody expects. So Jesus asks his disciples, chapter 16, he says, "Who do you all say that I am?" And Peter comes up with the right answer, it seems. He says, "Well, you're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God." But then it becomes clear that Peter's thinking about a king who's going to reign victoriously through military power. And Jesus challenges Peter, saying that, yes, I am going to become king, but through a different way. And so Jesus starts to teach on themes from the prophet Isaiah, who said that the Messianic king would suffer and die for the sins of his own people. And so Jesus, he was positioning himself as a Messianic king who reigns by becoming a servant, and who would lay down his life for Israel and the nations. Well, Peter and the disciples, they mostly just don't get it. And so Jesus enters into the fourth block of teaching, followed by a series of teachings after that. And these are all about the upside-down nature of Jesus' messianic kingdom, which turns upside down all of our value systems. So in the community of the servant king, you gain honor by serving others. And instead of getting revenge, you forgive and do good to your enemies. And in Jesus' kingdom, you gain true wealth by giving your wealth away to the poor. To follow the servant Messiah, you must become a servant yourself. In the next section, we watch the two kingdoms clash, Jesus' kingdom and that of Israel's leader. Jesus comes to Jerusalem for Passover riding in on a donkey, and the crowds are hailing him as the Messiah. And Jesus immediately marches into the courtyard of the temple, and he creates this huge disruption that brings the daily sacrifices to a halt. His actions speak louder than words here. As Israel's king, Jesus was asserting his royal authority over the temple, the place where God and Israel met together. And in Jesus' view, the temple was compromised by the hypocrisy of Israel's leaders. And so here he's challenging their authority, and naturally, they're deeply offended. And so they try to trap Jesus and shame him in public debate, and they fail. So they end up just determining to have him killed. In response, Jesus delivers his final block of teaching. He first offers this passionate critique of the Pharisees and their hypocrisy, and then he weeps over Jerusalem and its rejection of God and his kingdom. Then Jesus withdraws with the disciples, and he starts telling them what's going to happen. He's going to be executed by these leaders, but in doing so, they're going to create their own demise, because instead of accepting Jesus' way of the peaceful kingdom, they're going to take the road of revolt against Rome, and so Jerusalem and its temple are going to be destroyed. But, Jesus says, that is not the end of the story. He's going to be vindicated after his death by his resurrection. And one day, he'll return and set up his kingdom over all nations. And so in the meanwhile, the disciples need to stay alert and stay committed to just announcing Jesus and his kingdom and spreading the good news. And so with all of that ringing in the disciples' ears, the story comes to its climax. That night, Jesus takes the disciples aside and he celebrates a Passover meal with them. The Passover retells the story of Israel's rescue from slavery through the death of the Passover lamb. And then Jesus takes the bread and the wine from this meal as new symbols, showing that his coming death would be a sacrifice that would redeem his people from slavery to sin and evil. After the meal, Jesus is arrested. He's put on trial before the Sanhedrin, a council of Jewish leaders, and they reject his claim to be the Messiah. They charge him with blasphemy against God. Then Jesus is brought before the Roman governor Pilate, and he thinks Jesus is innocent, but he gives in to the pressure from the Jewish leaders, and he sentences Jesus to death by crucifixion. So Jesus is led away by Roman soldiers and crucified. Now, you'll notice right here in this section that just like Matthew did in the opening chapters, he increases the number of references to the Old Testament. He's trying to show that Jesus' death was not a tragedy or a failure. Rather, it was the surprising fulfillment of all of the old prophetic promises. Jesus came as the servant Messiah, spoken of by Isaiah. He was rejected by his own people, but instead of judging them, he is judged on their behalf, bearing the consequences of their sin. So the crucifixion scene, it comes to a close, and Jesus' body is placed in a tomb. But the book ends with a surprising twist, the last chapter. The disciples, they discover on Sunday morning that Jesus' tomb is empty. And then all of a sudden people start seeing Jesus alive from the dead. And the book concludes with the risen Jesus giving a final teaching called the Great Commission. Jesus says that he is now the true king of the world. And so he sends his disciples out to all nations with the good news that Jesus is Lord and that anyone can join his kingdom by being baptized and by following his teachings. And echoing all the way back to his name, Emmanuel, God with us, from chapter 1, Jesus' last words in the book to his disciples are, "I will be with you." It's a promise of Jesus' presence until the day he finally returns. And that's the gospel according to Matthew.
All right, got all that? What's fun is you can go back and watch it again. I've watched it like 4 or 5 times now, and I think every time I get a new little insight, like taking that. So I wish my
The Gospel according to Mark is one of the first accounts of the life of Jesus, and our earliest historical traditions link this book to a Christian scribe named Mark, or John Mark.
this morning she got up and talked to me about his master. Really struck her, and I'll do a horrible job of paraphrasing. I will do it for her. She said, one of the things that really hit her when she was writing this homework for chapter 14 or 13 was Jesus came in. That Jesus is really that. And if you look at how he moved here, and all the crowds that he had, he flashed over the city. That there was moments of weakness that he went to garden and pray. He asked his closest friends when they were praying. Others could read this, but really hold on to that idea. Even though it's not always fun, you want to just think of the divine quality. He's powerful and he's nothing. But if you look at him, he's so near. Every way, tempted as we are, yet still, really encouraged. Even through all that, even though he's like, come on, I'm done. I'm going back up to heaven. You guys do this. Take care of yourself. And he's done. So really, the powerful so I really hope you'll read this semester with Peptide, that you'll listen to the insights that we interview with all the different teachers from this semester. Hopefully it'll be fun and different every week. you to come as much as you can, do as much of the homework as you can, and if not, come anyways, okay? So I'm really excited for the semester, and